What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Pride of Detroit YouTube channel. I'm Miko, joined by my guy Morgan here. And Morgan, we're back to do another film study of another most recent Lions free agent signing. This time we're going to be focused on Amik Robertson. And I know this was somebody that you were really high on, right? Like when the Lions first originally signed him.
Yeah, man. I remember when the Lions played the Raiders. I believe he made a pretty good impact off the top, if I'm not mistaken. And then you just watch him on film. The way he plays, he plays a lot bigger than he is. You know, his physical stats aren't going to jump off the page at you. But yeah, man, he competes, and that's what you want out of your corners. And there's a world where he may not start the entire year, but if you do, you could be doing a lot worse, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to say, personally, and just full transparency, like I wasn't through the roof on this signing, right? Like wasn't super familiar with who he was. Definitely was taken back by the measurables and was just like, okay, so we got a slot corner. But again, everything that you hear about Amik is that like, no, he's an outside corner. He can play in the slot for sure, but he's very capable of playing on the outside. So I was really excited to get into this tape, and I can fully admit my opinion of him as a player completely changed off of just starting with one game, and then like I watched a couple others just to make sure that this wasn't just a one game occurrence. The Lions might have their CB2 here, Morgan, and I don't think that's being too presumptuous on my part.
No, and that's ideally what you have going into the year. You'd have him and Carlton Davis as your cornerback 1 and 2. And then even if you do draft somebody high, you don't have to start them right away and throw them into the fire, right? You'd rather cornerback's a tough position, man. Even we all thought, excuse me, Jeff Okudah, I know people had issue with where he was drafted, but people thought he was a sure thing, man. Tape was awesome. And he came in and it just hasn't worked. And, it's been a little bit of his fault, a little bit of situation. Obviously the context always matters, but I say all this to say that with Amik, this is a good situation to come into. The defense is getting better. Not having to be the cornerback 1 is going to be good. Obviously, like that's going to fall to Carlton Davis. As long as he's healthy, he's going to be guarding the other team's best receiver, right?
Yeah, and I think what we're going to get into in the tape we see here is that he's still comfortable whether he's having to cover the wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2. He doesn't take a lot of steps back in his game. With that said, he's not a perfect player, right, Morgan? Like very few are in this league, and very few are that you're getting in free agency. But he does enough things well to kind of cover up for his deficiencies. And I think the Lions can definitely come up with game plans and put him in situations where he won't have to, where his weaknesses won't be, preyed upon too much.
Yeah, and that's why the rest of the defense is big, man, physical, if you really think about it across the board for the Lions. But yeah, 5'8", 183 is what he's listed on per PFF. But he plays bigger than that. I know I said it at the top, but I really do believe that, man. He comes with some attitude, and the word that, when we watch his film that comes to mind is fearless. Like he doesn't really care who you are, how much you're getting paid, how many touchdowns or catches you have. It's about that rep, and that's kind of how you have to be as a corner in this league, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You would use the word fearless. I would probably use the word technician. And I think like that's kind of like the pattern that I'm starting to kind of notice with how the Lions are choosing to kind of address the secondary, specifically the cornerback room. So let's go ahead and jump like into the film, and let's start with the first play that we have here. And Morgan, I'm not sure how much it stood out to you, but when I was going through his tape, one of the things that really stood out to me is how well he covers these outbreaking routes. Again, being a smaller corner, you would think that you would have, again, a much more difficult time covering these types of routes where the wide receiver can more or less box you out. And now you're kind of at a disadvantage. But Amik, this is where I think that technician label really fits him, because he does a really good job of understanding where he needs to be in coverage to basically make these throws much more difficult, or to basically take a quarterback away and make them have to go somewhere else.
Yeah, and you see it like time and time again with him, just dealing with motion well, like where a receiver will motion to his side of the field, and then you have to deal with it on the fly almost, and that's where your communication has to be sound as a defense. And one thing I really like when you watch him is he's good at communicating with his teammates. very rarely is he going to be out of position, or somewhere where he's not supposed to be, and his teammates looking at him with the palms in the air. You hate to be that defender when your teammates are looking at you with their palms in the air. But yeah, I like this rep, and you see this a lot, right, Miko?
Yeah, like again, this is an incomplete pass, and no, Christian Watson wasn't targeted. But again, if you look at specifically where the quarterback is looking, and this is the same stuff we talked about when we discussed Carlton Davis, right, Morgan, is that it's not just as a matter of okay targets and receptions. It's how well are you covering, your portion of the field to make the quarterback have to go to their second, third, fourth read possibly, um, and kind of throw them off their rhythm. And Amik does that really well here, where again, Christian Watson motions to his side of the field, takes a really good step backwards, but immediately once he sees him kind of break to the outside, does a good job of just kind of cutting off that easy angle here. Where again, if Jordan Love tries to throw this is probably a pick six the other way, right, Morgan?
Yeah, and he gets away from that progression quickly. If you watch his eyes, like he's like, nope, because that's he plays that really well. Even though you do have two receivers in his vicinity, but he wants that deep shot, and this is a good game for Love, if I remember correctly. This is one of the games where he played pretty well, but I do think they lost this game, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
this was one of his worst games. And again, like the Raiders really
Ooh.
took advantage of one of his earlier starts. I think he threw like 3 interceptions, one of which did go to Amik, which we'll get to in this film breakdown. But
Oh, I remember that one. You're
but I
right,
mean, you're going to
actually.
see the same thing that we're talking about here. Again, another outbreaking route, and again, Jordan Love has to tuck and run this one, but it's because Amik does a good job once again taking away this outbreaking route by Romeo Dobbs here, where again he gets to the top of his route, goes to break outside, and he just undercuts it. So even if Jordan Love wanted to stay in the pocket and try to throw this with some sort of anticipation, you're getting picked off, right?
Yeah, it's one of those situations where the corner runs the route with the receiver, and he's really good at gearing down when receivers get to the top of their route stem and they're like looking to, break down and gear, excuse me, break either way, right? To the top, to the left, or to the right. And
Mm-hmm.
he's good at, he flips his hips. He's confident, like we talked about with Carlton Davis. He's confident in his back pedal. But yeah, I like this because you like quarterback on offense, cornerbacks, you have to play with a good amount of anticipation, right, Miko, to really be good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's another thing too. Like, right, Amik does a good job of reading this. He sees that Romeo Dobbs kind of wants to go take the outside on this route. So again, flips his hips to the right direction. Again, makes it easy for him to kind of cover that type of route. Um, Again, this is more of an in-breaking route. And again, Amik does a good job of recognizing it early and being able to crash down on it. And like we've been kind of saying, right, taking away an option for the quarterback so they have to take their eyes somewhere else.
Yeah, you want quarterbacks working through, if the good ones process really quickly and work through their progressions really quickly. But yeah, you see this a lot with Amik, and just good cornerback play in the NFL is, corners want to be in phase, is what we call it, right, Miko? So you're within arm's distance, typically, and almost in the hip pocket, if you can be, with your the person you're covering. And yeah, man, this is a good rep because you want them to not throw this ball, because this is what the offense is looking for, an easy pitch and catch where it's going to move the chains. Think about what the Lions do to defenses constantly, right?
Yeah, and he does have some help here, right, with the linebacker or the safety underneath here. So again, making this a little bit more of a difficult throw, but again, these are the things that I wasn't quite expecting to see in a Meeks game. Morgan, just like again, with him being a smaller stature, these are types of routes that I would think that like, oh, a corner of that stature would get taken advantage of. Anything where he has to respond quickly on the outside, whether it's inside or to the outside to the sideline, he may have a difficult time. But Amik does an amazing job of again understanding route concepts, understanding down and distance, understanding what opposing offenses probably want to do, and then making aggressive reads on it to again be able to take away these easy type of throws.
Yeah, and you have to be well studied if you are going to play cornerback at a high level in the NFL for a while, just because everyone's fast, everyone's quick in space, everyone can has really nice footwork. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in the NFL. So yeah, this is he plays with a lot of anticipation. That's the word I keep coming up with, and the good ones really do. But you see him drive when he makes a decision, he
Hmm.
goes right. Like there's not a lot of like, oh, maybe he's just going to go, and that's what you have to be to have like play the position really well, right?
Yeah, you have to be able to, again, be able to make quick decisions, because if you don't, right, on a route like this, which actually I think it's on the next play we'll get a good example of, but like, Christian Watson is coming right at him. He has to make a decision. Is he going to go inside or outside? And Amik has to be able to quickly decide and break on the ball, or break on the receivers, so that, again, if the ball is thrown to Watson here, he's able to disrupt this play and at least get a PBU.
Yep, and it's about not being flat-footed. If you're going to be, in that technique as a cornerback, you can't be caught flat-footed because they could run right by you. They could put a move on you at the top of their route and break towards the boundary, or run an in breaker. So you have to be ready, and that's why it's such a tough position to play, man. In my opinion, playing cornerback is the second. That's the hardest position on defense. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like that's a tough position. You can't touch them outside of 5 yards, and people are so big and so fast these days. So yeah, you love to see it.
Yeah, and I think, like, so what you were just saying again about the importance of not being caught flat-footed, as good as Amik is, again, at making quick decisions, at understanding route concepts, and again, when he sees something, he usually commits to it quickly. This next play is a really good example of what happens when he doesn't make that decision quickly, and what happens when, um, again, he's either a little too late, or if he just missteps. And while this pass isn't completed to Watson, Morgan, I'm curious on your opinion, but to me, when I was watching this, like, this was wide open. Like, if Jordan Love sees this, this is a really big play to Christian Watson on this play.
Yeah, and you wonder, like, if this is a miscommunication, but like the way that he allowed him to run through his zone so easily.
Hmm.
It's just you saw this a couple times, sadly, for the Raiders, where maybe the defense wasn't on the same page. But I don't know. This was a puzzling one for me too.
Yeah, and I think it's just like, the way I kind of summed it up was like, it's just a misstep, right? Like, if Amik is a little bit more like, he's kind of walking forward as the ball is being snapped, instead of just kind of, again, like he had done on the previous play, kind of squares his shoulders, waits till the receiver gets to him, and then breaks. He gets kind of like caught like in that first initial step, and he can't even like kind of plant and drive once Christian Watson kind of takes that slant route.
Yeah, and I look at 5'2" breaking so hard and like going to like it's one of the receivers out of the bunch up there. Uh,
Hmm.
Five drives on, and that leaves a bunch of open space, and you do wonder, on plays like that, like if it were to be, completed, if Jordan Love would have seen him right up the middle, then what would have looked like? And I will say this is a nice bounce back rep though, right?
Yeah. So again, one other thing that I was really curious to see on tape is like, okay, again, smaller receiver, how do you handle the deep routes, right? How do you handle if you maybe don't have safety help, or you got to be one on one on the outside? Or do quarterbacks basically pick on you here? And this is where I agree with you, where it's like, Amik's always up for the challenge. He's always ready to compete, because he's stride for stride here with Christian Watson. And Christian Watson has kind of made a little bit of a name for himself on these types of routes.
Yeah, Christian Watson can fly. I don't get it twisted. I know everybody probably watching this doesn't really love the Packers, and nor do I. But yeah, to your point, Miko, the man can run. So this is a nice rep, because stride for stride, we talked about in phase earlier. You can't get much better than this in terms of a rep, unless you're going to pick it off. That would obviously be a little bit better. But yeah, this is a good one, because this is where Love got really good at doing this down the stretch last season. And
Mm-hmm.
I think this is going to be lethal. This is going to be a tough part of their offense to defend moving forward. But yeah, you love to see this, because I hate to say love right now, right? Then it's going to be a play on words. But yeah, it's good to see Amik do well against a team like the Packers, because they are going to push it down the field. And to your point, Miko, he's not afraid.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter if it's Christian Watson or Romeo Dobbs. Again, Romeo Dobbs gets his opportunity here, and again, just stride for stride, right? Takes away any type of window that Jordan Love may have had. to try to air this out. He does have a little bit of safety help on the inside here. But again, good on Amik to again not let the receiver get on top of him here, get a step ahead of him. And this is the stuff that kind of goes unsung. We said it a lot when we broke down the Carlton Davis tape, Morgan. It's not an incompletion, it's not a PBU, but it's still solid coverage that you want from a starting caliber corner.
Yeah, the word that came to mind here was just understanding where you are on the field too, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it's good to see that too, because if you are going to be a little bit of an undersized corner in the NFL, to your point, you have to be a technician. You have to really understand how to play the game the right way, or else some bad things can happen, right?
Yeah, and I think to that point, that's kind of what this play was. And you and I had like a good conversation, like trying to understand what went wrong in this play. I'm not saying it's all Amik's fault, but I don't think he's blameless either. And this is what happens again when you're not sounding your technique or probably understanding what the coverage is. You open yourself up to get, beat deep on a play like this. And this is where Christian Watson can kind of show off what he does best.
Yeah, I really don't know what they were doing here, because it appears several people were on different plans, right? And
Yeah.
it looks like my friend, who I really trust, and said maybe it's cover 3, like they were in cover 3, but showing it and pre-snap and then rolling to cover 2 as the ball snapped. And that's what happens, right? Like half the secondary has one call, the other half of the secondary has another call, and you're stuck in no man's land, and people, someone's running down the field by themselves, and they got a horse collar at the end to add insult to injury, right? That was tough.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, this was not a good game for Green Bay. They needed all the help they could get and still end up losing. But no, I'm right there with you where like I do think there may have been some sort of miscommunication and possibly a disguise in coverage, or again, maybe an exotic form of coverage, because things get really weird at the top of the screen where you have Marcus Peters, basically covering the deep half of the field as if he's going to back here to play safety. But then the thing that gets weird is between Amik and I believe this is Epps.
Yeah.
Yeah, of somebody is supposed to be covering this other deep part of the field. And I don't know if it's supposed to be Amik because Marcus Peters is covering the deep half in place of the safety that was playing close to the line of scrimmage, or if Epps was supposed to cover deep and, Amik is responsible for Romeo Doubs here, who's coming on the crossing route. Either way, it results in Christian Watson being wide open. And if not for this horse collar tackle, would have been an easy touchdown.
That's what your breakdown right there is kind of what makes me believe it should have been cover 2, and 1 should have had the other half of the field, right? Peters had the 1. They rolled to, Peters, if you look at the top of the screen here, it looks like he's rolling to a deep half. And in my opinion, 1 should have had the other deep half. That's what cover 2 is, right? You have that two deep shell.
Mm-hmm.
For the people watching this and not just listening to our beautiful voices. But yeah, that's how things get messed up, is one person's on one call and others are on another, and then someone's streaking through your secondary. You don't like that.
Yeah, so this is something that, again, Amik, I think, can get better at, whether it's, again, better communication, because this is another thing that I was like kind of consistent in the games that I watched. You don't see a ton of communication on the Raiders secondary.
No. Yeah.
And obviously in Detroit, like that's huge. Like Aaron Glenn is very big on guys communicating, whether it's people being in motion, whether it's, again, we're shifting coverages. You're going to take this half, I'm taking this. You don't see a ton of that pre-snap with the Raiders. And so again, that may be just something that Amik has to become more accustomed to once he gets here in Detroit.
Yep, I agree. Because that's big for Aaron Glenn. To your point, that's a huge aspect of how the Lions play defense. This next rep, I will say, this is great because he's playing off. Like that's a pretty hefty cushion. But man, for not being a big dude, I know we're getting back to he's not scared conversation again, but this is nice to see, being able to come up near the line of scrimmage, get somebody on the ground, and make the play.
Yeah, these are things that you're going to, again, if you're going to put Amik out there, right, one-on-one with the receiver, you have to be able to trust that he's not afraid to come up and make these types of hits. Obviously, Green Bay still end up picking up the first down, but Again, that's picking up first down, still making a tackle versus this again being, you know, a touchdown, right? If Romeo Dobbs is able to keep his feet here and just scamper down the sideline.
Right. And Dobbs is another really good receiver too for Green Bay. So that's a very good point because it could be worse, man. And that's what you want when those if they're throwing, which Green Bay does a lot, which I think a lot of teams do a lot these days. The Lions don't do a ton of it in Ben Johnson's offense. Just those little quick smoke screens out near the boundary,
Mm-hmm.
just trying to get the ball into your receiver's hands. The Packers do a good bit of that because Dobbs is nice after the catch.
Yeah.
But yeah, you have to be good against because you have Justin Jefferson for the Vikings. There's some dangerous dudes running around in the NFC North.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I think like Amik is going to have to get better at addressing how he wants to tackle in space. Because like I don't think Morgan that he's a terrible tackler in space. I will say I'm not sure that he's a willing tackler in space, and I don't know if he always understands the best way of getting to the ball carrier so that he can get them down. And I think this next play is a good one where, again, it's a similar type of flare screen, but this time he has to get around Romeo Dobbs, who's going to come out there to block him. And again, I don't. This is probably a negative. Maybe this is probably one of the negatives where his size does kind of come up because Romeo Dobbs doesn't do a ton here, but he still is able to wall him off and give Jaden Reed here a really good head start to picking up some yards.
Yeah, you're going to have to be able to put your nose in it for Aaron Glenn's defense because that's what they expect out of their corners. You're going to have to tackle. You're going to have to play up near the line of scrimmage when the defense calls for it. Yeah, this is you want to see more in his defense. I get trying to undercut the block and try to knife in there and make the play. Some people can do that. Shoot, CJ Gardner-Johnson makes a living making plays like that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you'd like to see a little bit more of an effort just to maybe stick it to Dobbs a little bit more there in terms of the physicality of the play, but not something I'll kill him for, but it could be played better for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's just something that I think again is going to take maybe again getting with the secondary where that is a bigger part of it because I think he does play the run well, like we can see here, right? When he has an open lane to the ball carrier, he commits to it. Again, not necessarily scared of contact. Like I said, not trying to insinuate that at all. But I do think he could be better in this regard.
Yeah, you could hopefully be a little bit more technical, right? Just because you are an undersized defender, if you're a defender like Amik Robertson, and that's what this is. It's one of the little fancy handoffs that the Packers will do to Watson to try to showcase his speed. And I like the play design, right? They have 81 out there in space. They have 28 AJ Dillon out there in space to get some blockers, but he may not make the play, but being disruptive and getting downhill and kind of playing with your hair on fire usually will breed good results.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, like I said, like this is the stuff that gives me hope that he can be a good player in the run. I wouldn't recommend doing this a ton though, Morgan.
No, this is tough. I that's what I wrote down here in the notes. I was like, I just think I wrote, yeah, damn in all caps because this isn't fun, right, man? You're 5'8", you're listed at 183. And AJ Dillon, what is 250, Miko?
Yeah,
240,
he's a big
250?
guy.
They call him the Quadzilla and all that. Like he's a big dude. But I believe in this. I never want to say with a definitive, aspect, but I believe Amik is the force player here. So nothing gets outside of him in
Mm-hmm.
terms of, so yeah, he's got to come down here and stick his nose in it. And I can tell you this one didn't feel good, did it, Miko?
No, it's never a good time when you're supposed to be making a tackle and then the next thing you know, you're looking up at the sky. Um, Again, limited gain, right? So it wasn't like he
Yep.
got trucked in and AJ Dillon kept going, but yeah, this is probably a deficiency in his game to where, like you're saying, Morgan, you don't necessarily want to have him possibly setting an edge for you in these types of situations. If you can roll him to another side of the field or again do something different with your coverage where again he doesn't have to be the guy on the edge, I think you will be better for it, and your defense will probably thank you. And Amik will definitely thank you if he doesn't have to keep having hits like that.
I think Amik will be thanking the likes of DJ Reader and Aleem and the people keeping the linebackers clean because if you keep Alex Anzalone and Jack Campbell and Derek Barnes and all those guys clean, and Brian Branch, our dude, big Brian Branch. If you're new to the channel, we
Big,
love Brian Branch.
yeah, big supporters here.
Yeah. So yeah, I hopefully that is what happens more often than not, because yeah, to your point, we don't want a Meek coming down and having to tackle 250 pounders a lot. It's not good
Yeah,
for anybody.
for sure. So let's get back to the good though, because like
Yeah.
that was rough, right? He had a couple
Yeah.
rough plays there. Let's get back to the good of Amik Robinson, and I think him in the red zone, again, another area where he shines really well, and this is where he can really flex his physicality, because again, it's players do get called for defensive holding in these types of situations, but again, it as a receiver, you have to be doing something to warrant that flag here. And Amik does a good job of Romeo Doubs not really doing much, so I'm gonna just chuck you out of bounds.
Yeah, and I love the late adjustment right before watch as the ball is snapped here. This is what I wrote down. This is just a perfect red zone rep too, man. But you'll see Amik takes a couple steps to the outside right before the ball is snapped. Right, he's understanding his leverage. I know I brought that up earlier, but
Mm-hmm.
you're gonna position your hips that way. And aren't you taught, Miko? Correct me. I know you were the DB, but especially in the red zone, once they get to the boundary, you're just keeping your eyes on them. You're fine at that point. So he's
Yeah.
basically just shadowing Dobbs, and we talked about it earlier. Dobbs is a really good athlete and a good in the red zone. So yeah, this is a really nice rep, because then yeah, he just kind of throws him out the club, which I love. Just a little bit more salt in the wound.
Yeah, and this is just like, again, this is I'm assuming this play was probably originally designed for Jaden Reed, right? They're
Yeah.
hoping Jaden Reed gets a cleaner release off the line here.
Mm-hmm.
But again, Romeo Doubs doesn't do his quarterback any favors, because he basically runs a
Out the
9
club.
route. Yeah,
Yeah.
like in the red zone, where again, if you maybe run a slant here, maybe you can get a natural pick. Like, this is just not good play design. But again, Amik is the beneficiary of this, because he does a good job of making sure that his man doesn't just get loose in the back of the end zone.
Yeah, Dobbs just didn't give himself enough real estate to operate like back by the boundary, because yeah, he quickly realized, he's like, dang, I ran out of real estate fast, man. So yeah, that was an overall good rep though, because if you're Amik, you just want to make that as easy as possible for yourself, and I think that's what he did here. And man, I'm so glad you saved this for the last one. This is a beauty. I'll let you kick it off.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, the theme of the video, or the theme of Amik Robertson, right, is that his size doesn't really matter. He's athletic enough, he's competitive enough to where if he's in phase, if he understands how to put himself in position to make a play, he can make a play. And this was absolutely the play of the game, because this is ball game for the Raiders in this situation.
Yeah, he called game, right? And I love this play for Robertson for several different reasons, because initially, so he opens his hips towards the middle of the field. Again, we're playing with good leverage, understanding where we're at. He takes a couple steps in. I noticed at the top of like that little action that Watson's running there, like as he veers out towards the sideline. And I love that, he's like, okay, we got to get in catch-up mode. Catches up to Watson, finds him, doesn't interfere, gets his head around, and then just like levitates for a hot second before the interception. That's perfect, right? Like, you can't do much better.
No, not at all. And again, I can't remember what, like, how much time was on the clock here, or if Green Bay had any timeouts. But that step inside that you mentioned, it's almost like, again, like he was almost expecting another in-breaking route here. Maybe they're trying to, a deep post. But again, this is where athleticism really kicks in, because he's able to, like you said, flip those hips, find the receiver, and then it's just like, cool, now it's a track meet. Let me catch up, cover space. And a poorly thrown football, honestly. I mean, if we're being completely honest, like as big as Christian Watson is, like, you probably should be throwing this a little bit higher, even more so to that back pylon.
Yeah, and earlier too, because he hasn't beat initial. Like, you throw it earlier, he hasn't beat, but he throws it late. And to Robertson's credit, that he does a good job here, because a lot of, I think, lesser corners, in a nice way of saying it, would have probably interfered here, just because you're in snap mode and you're trying to catch up. And as he gears down, a lot of corners would have just ran through him and interfered. But Amik chopped those feet, slowed down, found the receiver, and man, that's just such a pretty rep. I remember seeing that on his highlight tapes a
Yeah.
couple of times, and that's where I keep like it's one of my biggest visions when I think of Robertson and like how he plays. It's a good one to have, especially against
No,
the
and it really is. And I think, and I know if you're watching this video, like, hey, this is just one game. Like, like, how does he play in the other ones? I implore you to, like, again, go back. If you have like NFL Plus, go back and watch some of these games, because he does the same thing. Yes, this was Jordan Love early in the season, and I think the Raiders really picked on him and took advantage of that, you know, first couple starts experience. But explain that when he has a really strong performance against the Kansas City Chiefs late in the season and Patrick Mahomes is out there, right? He had really good performances against Minnesota. He had really good performances against the Giants. The Lions, I think, have themselves a very competitive corner. And like I said earlier, Morgan, I think they have their CB2, good technician, great competitive, corner on the outside, and somebody that I think is going to help the secondary be much better than it was a year ago.
Yeah, it's a big upgrade in terms of who's playing opposite of your CB1, because we talked about it before. Carlton Davis is he's gonna draw the number one matchup, if you will, on a week to week basis. That's just his game. Where he can play. Robertson can play guard that second receiver and not be tasked with doing too much. And he's not perfect. We just looked at several plays where he's not necessarily the ideal cornerback in the NFL, but there's a reason the Lions gave him the contract that he got, and other teams were interested in him too. So it's there's enough tape on him out there where the NFL people know he's a pretty good player, right, Meko?
Yeah, I was gonna say, of the plays that we broke down, the only ones where, like, because I know there are people that are like really hung up on his height, and like I said, I was too when he first got here. Of the plays that we broke down, though, there's 14 plays here. We probably highlighted 2 that really like kind of highlighted like, hey, this is where his height is a deficiency, and it's either in the run game, or again, even screens can be considered an extension of the run game. So when he has to make these types of tackles where he has to take on blockers or he has to take on running backs in the open space, those are toss-ups, and he's probably not always going to be on the winning side of those. But as far as in coverage, which is what you pay your corners to do, to cover, he's more than capable to do that.
Agreed. Yeah, he can do it all, and there's a lot of corners in the NFL that don't like to tackle.
It's the stereotype that they get slapped with, right?
There's plenty of that out there, because to be fair, no one really wants to tackle AJ Dillon and just come downhill and have to fit a gap and tackle, and that's just not fun for anybody typically, unless you're Jack Campbell and you're as big as him or bigger. You know what I mean? So
Right.
It's or Derek Barnes, but you get my point. But yeah, I think Amik's a good player, someone who's a more than capable starter in this league, as he's shown, and he's still young. He's only 25 years old too, so there's maybe potential in there that could be untapped with an Aaron Glenn coach defense.
Yeah, 100%. So let us know what you guys are feeling about Amik Robertson. Are you excited about the Lions going out and signing him? Are you still kind of on the fence even after this film study? Let us know in the comment section below. And be sure to go check out pridedetroit.com. That way you can check out any of the new articles or anything like relatively new that's being posted over there. And again, unfortunately, as you guys know about the situation with the podcast, while there may not be audio content that's being put out weekly, Morgan and I, as well as some of the other POD staff members, are always going to be here putting out new content over here on the Pride of Detroit YouTube channel. So make sure you subscribe. Make sure you share this channel with other people. Share this video with other Lions fans. And we will continue to bring you guys amazing content. So with that said, I'm Meko. He's Morgan. Thank you guys for taking the time to watch. And we'll catch you guys in the next one.